I think this is a special episode. So instead of doing mic'd up, I think for one episode, this channel is going to be Micah up. How's it going, Mike?
Doing good. A request, actually, one of our first requests here on the channel. Shout out Drew Daughtry, right? Said he was a fan from Philadelphia, but not a Penn State fan. So we want to know what the deal was with Micah Parsons, maybe whether the Eagles take him or not, or should take him or not. So hopefully, Drew, this is to your liking, right? In terms of Micah Parsons' sort of background and stats, just hopping right in. The first thing, there's a couple moving parts here, right? The first thing we're going to talk about is probably the opt-out. With all these guys, you don't know what direction have they went, up or down. Have they spent a year getting better, specializing their skills, or have they spent a year kind of taking advantage of the current situation? Mike, concerns about the opt-out, considering maybe Micah's play style, or not so much considering maybe what we saw at the pro day?
Absolutely, there's definitely concerns. His pro day did look good for a lot of his athleticism, but I think on tape, strength was a concern, and he had what you said, 19 reps at 225. That's a concern when you're playing in the front seven. I wish he would have worked on that a little bit more, especially for his size. You think they came in at 246. You think he would have put up a little bit more than that, but there's definite concerns. Anytime you play in the front seven, especially linebacker, man, it's just a lot of. I feel like there's nothing you can really compare to in game just getting reps in there. It's a lot of reads. It's a lot of just a lot of things happening in front of you, and he hasn't had it for a year. So I think it's definitely going to be when he gets back on the field, it's going to be a process. But I think he can get there. But no, definitely concerned.
No, most certainly. And then in terms of those pro day numbers, you mentioned the 19 reps on bench. Otherwise, a 10-foot 6 inch broad, relatively solid, a 4.39 40-yard dash, which obviously that's just incredibly freakish. A 4.4 second shuttle, which is in the bottom 50% of guys. I know Mike wasn't really surprised by that. He thinks his change of direction skills are a little bit questionable, as well as a 6.94 cone. So a very good day there, outside of maybe a couple tests for Parsons. Another question, obviously, as we get into his background, Mike, and I'll kind of pass this to you, is some character concerns, right? What's the deal there with Parsons, and how are we handling that, I guess?
Yeah, so some hazing concerns back at his time at Penn State. There's a couple other people on the case and so forth, but with that, I think it's definitely concern. Again, we are not lawyers or attorneys by no means. We are not with any NFL teams getting the inside information. We're not interviewing them. Any of that stuff. When we do our grades, that is totally beyond the point. But if any of this is true, we obviously that definite, um, feel for the victims, and that would definitely hurt his grade. If anything, he wouldn't be on our board. But that's not something we can evaluate. There's nothing. All we know is a couple articles. So, and what's the factuality behind it? We're just not 100% sure. So, we're not evaluating it, but it is a concern. Obviously, it's something. If your team is looking into them, hopefully they have a better understanding of what the hell was happening.
No, exactly. We are, I said in a previous video, we are the film guys. We are not when it comes to character and, those legal issues. We're not lawyers. Like Mike said, we're not in terms of medical issues. We're not doctors either, right? So we are grading strictly off of primarily what we see on tape, as well as some of just the raw athleticism numbers. So in terms of the grade itself, hopping right in, just in terms of kind of what I saw, Mike, obviously he's maybe a little bit different, but I thought the number one thing that obviously jumped off the tape with Parsons was that athleticism, right? You saw that speed sideline to sideline, as well as just kind of stepping up in the box and filling downhill. I will note with him, when I say filling, it's maybe not the prototypical filling, right? A lot of times a linebacker, you think somebody filling in terms of being very physical, taking on a guard, taking on a tackle. He might be one of the least physical linebackers that we've scouted here in terms of first round, second round prospects in a while. I know really, really no interest in getting hit. And with his athleticism, he can get away with that, whether it's sort of a rip move, a sort of quick swim, all these various little things. But the sort of prototypical stack and shed, that's just not in his game, right? So it's interesting because he is still making a lot of plays downhill, but the way by which he's doing it, some question marks there. I think in terms of his coverage skills, I thought he was all right in zone coverage. He would do a good job of not letting stuff behind him, but kind of in a similar light with the physicality. he wasn't very aggressive either in terms of playing up on stuff and really making plays on those shorter routes. So, you could pretty easily hit a drag or a slant in front of him, whereas it was pretty difficult with that athleticism and range to get stuff in behind him. Otherwise, I thought his IQ and awareness, initially this grade was a little bit lower. As I watched more and more guys, I felt like I had to bump it higher because you just realize how around the ball he is, right? Constantly making plays, many a quarter, right? A lot of times you see guys going silent for stretches of games. That didn't really seem to be the case in any of the 5 Parsons films that I watched. Otherwise, quickness and change of direction, I slightly disagree with Mike there. I gave him a 9.5 out of 10, as well as just a high motor and a good finisher and tackler. So, Mike, thoughts on the grade? In general, do you agree, disagree? Are you higher, lower? Where are you at?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with just this the type of linebacker Micah Parsons is. He's kind of like in that, this new, almost new era. We call it hybrid. We've seen a lot of, Isaiah Simmons, Deion Buchanan a while ago, but like these linebackers that almost play more like safeties, and he kind of fits that mold just with pure physicality, just doesn't lack it. But kind of my gold standard for that is there was a draft a couple years ago that I think there was 2 players in that mold that fit it, and I think they are the gold standard. It's Jalen Smith, Miles Jack. Do I think he is that? Absolutely not. I don't think he's there. I think he is in that next, realm. I think he's a little bit more. I think his playmaking and maybe just the way Penn State used him as a prototypical linebacker. He played middle, he played strong side, he played weak side, he played on the line. I like that, and I think that's where you're going to get the best out of Micah Parsons. And I think quickness definitely showed. So it's kind of with quickness, change of direction in the same category. Maybe I would split them up myself, but at least for Micah, I think his quickness showed, and I think his ability to make plays just when he had his, when he's running straight line or sideline to sideline, and seeing the play develop a little bit in front of him, I think that's when he was at his best. Or if he just, kind of ran head first and into the 3 or 5 gap, I think that's also when he just kind of really showed some playmaking ability. So I wish I would have saw a little bit more pass coverage. I thought that's where I was kind of excited to see him. At least for me, the couple films I watched, I didn't watch as much as Mike, but I wish I would have saw more of it. I can't really evaluate it just purely based off the film I watched.
No, I definitely agree with that. I know it was pretty sporadic when he was doing it. More so, like I said, he was in the box, like you said, lined up in a variety of roles, Will, Sam, Mike, anywhere. And a lot of times it was just playing forward, whether it was blitzing, whether it was filling against the run, just doing those various things. I was actually going to ask you, you kind of already touched on it, where you thought he projected better across sort of that linebacking core. I don't think necessarily if you're drafting Micah to be a Mike linebacker for the next 10 to 15 years, I'm not banking on him to be Bobby Wagner, right? I think that he would be pretty significantly better as a Will, I would say. I don't think that he plays with enough strength to be a Sam in that regard. I don't really want him on the strong side of the formation, potentially asked to set an edge or, to do those various things. I would much rather have him on the backside of things. And is that sort of where you're at, Mike? I know you were shaking your head, but you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think Will is by far the most natural position for him. Do I think he play middle? Yes, but I think it's going to be very dependent on what's in front of him. If he has space eaters kind of taking up those blocks and he just, has the ability to, see the play develop in front of him and make that read, then I think that works. I think kind of a good example would be Devin Bush. Definitely doesn't have the strength to play middle linebacker, but in front of that Steelers front 5, I think it gave him that opportunity, and that's why, playing for the Steelers, he's looked really well. I think a little bit more than his strength would pursue, or Ryan Shazier for that kind of same matter. I think both looked really good in front of really good front 5s, and they were able to use that athleticism to their full capabilities. So I think Micah can play Mike, but I think he would have to have a very nice front 4, front 5 in front of him.
No, that's kind of interesting you say that as we get into the next slide and kind of comparing the positions overall, because when it comes to the position premium, I'm actually probably a little bit lower on the linebacker spot than other people are. I gave it 3% of its own grade reimbursed back into it because I do think many times a linebacker is so dependent, like Mike said, on those defensive tackles, those sort of space eaters and guys in front of him. And I think that you can mask deficiencies at linebacker significantly more than you can otherwise. I do want to ask because I have seen a couple people say this. I know, like you said, you didn't watch quite as much film, but some people really like him off the edge in terms of his ability to bend, his ability to play there. Do you think he has any play as a potential 3-4 outside linebacker at all, where he is primarily in the box, not very often asked to play backwards and cover? Do you think you saw any of that on film where you can just use that quickness? Or do you think that that's primarily out the window just because of his strength in that regard?
I wouldn't waste a pick on him if that's how I was going to use him. Do I think he could do it? Yes. Do I think in different I think with the way NFL teams use their defense, they try to show a variety of looks. So I think he could do it in certain situations, absolutely. But should that be his primary role? No, at least not by what I saw film. Yes, he has been, but I didn't think it was great by no means. It was there, but no, that's not how I would use him. And I think if where he's going to be drafted, minus any kind of concerns, if anything comes out on that front. It's going to be top 20, and I think there's better prospects at that 3-4 outside linebacker. I'd take it if I was looking for a 3-4 outside linebacker in that mid first round. I'd be taking Aziz over Micah.
No, I definitely agree in that regard. I think he did look solid blitzing, but then I think people kind of take that to the extreme and think, oh, that means he'd be an elite edge rusher when, hey, maybe he can do it every now and then in sort of sub packages, as you were kind of referring to there. But no, I think he most definitely fits better as that off ball linebacker as he was playing for the most part at Penn State. So as you guys will see overall, in terms of the sort of big board, that does bring him to my number 2 overall prospect, right? Kind of surprised me a little bit in terms of having him ahead of Penei Sewell, the offensive tackle out of Oregon. I know a lot of people have him higher, but I do think that there's a lot of promise there, assuming, like Mike said, those sort of hazing concerns, as long as they're false or not a concern, you can kind of come to a resolution in some capacity, right? Depending on what side of the story you hear, blah blah. I think that he has a higher floor than say Penei does, just because of that sort of athleticism at that linebacker spot. I mean, we've seen guys get away with the strength deficit, whether it was say a Deion Jones, guys like Devin Bush, as Mike said. I think that wherever you put him, he's going to be able to do well. But then I also think the ceiling is just as high, assuming he can sort of refine those skills. Maybe get into an NFL weight room, maybe learn how to stack and shed a guy for once, not be so devoid of physicality just in all phases of the game. Maybe get more comfortable flipping his hips, turning and running and playing in space as more of a coverage guy. So I think that I would personally take him to this point as my number 2 guy. I know some people might disagree, but I think that he's just a really solid all-around prospect, assuming the character checks out.
So I got a question real quick. So in the first round, what kind of range do you see him at? I guess he's your number 2, but I guess that would just, if looking at the board, would be a top 10 pick. But just my personal thought, I didn't see him as a top 10 prospect. So some of your thoughts there.
It's kind of interesting because obviously, the board is only where it is to this point, right? He's what, the 41st prospect, actually maybe 46th prospect that we graded actually so far. Forgot about some guards that I did there, but no, I think that number 2 right now, but obviously you have quarterbacks, you have wide receivers, you have a couple corners that maybe drop him down. And in that regard, no, I wouldn't say, oh, he's a top 5 prospect. I don't think. I wouldn't necessarily feel super comfortable getting him there just because of maybe those other concerns. But I think that I do think that right around 10 would probably be a good value. I know our Detroit Lions very well might be in the sort of market for a linebacker there at 7. And, that's kind of pushing it a little bit for me. I believe, just based off what I've heard about the quarterbacks and other guys that we haven't graded. But I wouldn't be shocked if he goes right around there, 7, 8, 9 in that range. And I think that as long as you're going to play him as that sort of off-ball linebacker, I do think that he'll do a pretty good job making good on that selection. You agree? You disagree? Where are you at?
I'd probably take him a little bit later. I think there are concerns, but at the same time, when you watch this film, it's like sometimes you're like, okay, he just got eaten up by a guard. And then other plays, you're like, he just made the play. He was a playmaker, and that's what you saw in the year. But so I guess, with the way, teams have been drafted, it seems like the first linebacker off the board is kind of in that range, if not a little bit later. Again, when I've taken a linebacker in the top 10, my gold standard is I'm looking for Jalen Smith or Miles Jack. And Miles Jack was taken in the second round, but if not for an injury, he probably would have been taken or top 10. And I just keep that's my standard for linebackers in top 10. It's probably not, it's a little bit high, but I just didn't see the same kind of film from Micah.
Well, I'm trying to think. So obviously Devin White, he went what, 6 in his draft, I believe, as well as Devin Bush went just a couple picks after, right? Obviously, in retrospect, maybe those picks turned out well. I think at the time, maybe slight reaches in that regard, but I think Micah is sort of in that caliber of guy. Yeah, I do, to where I think like an 8 to 12 would be a good solid value, and I think anything past that, you could be very well getting a steal, right? I think that, there are mocks where, kind of like you said, I've seen him slipping on people's boards to say the 20s, right? Sometimes 25. And I just don't quite see that on the tape. If they know more than we do regarding the other stuff, that's fine. But I just don't think that regarding the tape, it's very feasible to have him outside of the top 15, 20, let alone some people's linebacker 2 or 3, right? I think we'll obviously get into that in future videos, whether it's, Owusu, Zaven Collins, Nick Bolton, guys like that. But I think that for me, at least, Parsons is a pretty solid bet for linebacker 1.
For sure. And if you want a solid bet for a really solid YouTube channel talking about football, then you should like this video, comment, subscribe. We enjoyed doing this. We had a subscriber leave a comment saying we should do Micah. We're doing Micah. So, and we're going to keep doing that. So if you guys enjoy it, leave us a like. So with that, Mike, got anything?
No, just if you have a request, leave one of your own, right? Obviously, Drew asked, and we did our best to deliver. Maybe not as timely as he might have hoped, but we most certainly got around to it, and we'll do our best to get around to your suggestions. So I think with that being said, we're mic'd up. Now we're micing out. Peace, guys.
Doses.